Hello, and welcome back to the studio. I'm Dr. Wiggo, and this feels weird because this is Dr. Wiggo on books, which I used to do in the library, but now I can't because I got a teleprompter that's not really easily movable, so I can't move it to the library. And for books, there's lots of facts and figures and titles and stuff that I just have trouble keeping track of, so I need the teleprompter, but I can't. You see my dilemma. So we're in the studio for a books video and not in the library. And who we're talking about today is Alastair Reynolds, who has written a lot of books that I like. So Alastair Reynolds is a Welsh writer. He was born in Wales, grew up in Cornwall in Wales, and lives in Wales now. But he went off to college and got a PhD in astrophysics from the University of St. Andrews. And then he moved to Europe, where he was a research astronomer for the European Space Agency for several years. And that's where he started writing books. So you will probably not be surprised to learn that these are hard science fiction, like the kind that an astrophysicist would write, where there's no faster than light travel. There is in a couple of the books. But for the most part, there's no faster than light travel, and all the laws of physics apply. And he uses his knowledge of science and physics and everything to write pretty ripping yarns about stuff going on in outer space. A lot of these books are in what he calls the Revelation Space universe. Revelation Space is a term used in one of the books to describe some weird phenomenon. That's neither here nor there. But we have 8 books here spanning several centuries, because remember, no faster than light travel. So when he moves the story to another planet, it takes like 30, 40 years to get there. And that's at almost light speeds. So there's some big jumps as you move through these books. He's mainly famous for a bunch of books set in what he calls the Revelation Space universe. Not coincidentally, the name of his first published novel. It is a rip-roaring yarn. I loved this book. I first discovered Alastair Reynolds about 15 years ago. So I read this book about 8-10 years after it came out. But I loved it. Unfortunately, because I had waited, there were a whole bunch more that he had written in the meanwhile. So this was the first one, published in 2000. And it kind of sets up the whole arc of the whole Revelation Space universe. Then we move on to Redemption Arc, published in 2002, which the author describes as fun with killer aliens. It's true, but it's not really fun. Well, it's fun for us. It's not fun for them. Now we're in the 26th century. I probably should have mentioned, these books all start out when humanity has kind of scattered out into the galaxy. It's like the 25th century in this book, 26th century in this book. It goes on and on. The whole Revelation Space series technically spans like 8 billion years, but we skip over a lot of that early stuff. Book 3, Absolution Gap, takes a weird turn. Alastair Reynolds calls it an end times approach with cults forming, and it's very weird, very good. And it ties in with the other ones in ways that you don't really see coming until it happens in the book. And you go, oh, that's how that connects back to all this stuff I've read before. When this book starts, you're on another planet and another thing, and it doesn't seem to connect up at all. It will. Keep reading. Fantastic book. Fantastic 3 books. And these are the basic building blocks. These are the 3 main books of the Revelation Space universe. But he wasn't done. Now, Chasm City was a book he wrote in 2001. So it was after the first book, Revelation Space, but before Redemption Arc. And it's set in the same universe, but it's not directly connected to these 3 books. And Reynolds calls it a hard-boiled pursuit revenge thriller, which, having read it, I have to agree, that's kind of what it is. And this one won the British Science Fiction Award for Best Novel. It's a pretty good story, and again, if you've read these 3 books, you'll kind of know the world they're in, because this book goes to some of the same places that you visited in these other books, but it's not directly connected. It's kind of an offshoot. And then in 2021, just a few years ago, he wrote Inhibitor Phase, which is kind of an offshoot of the Revelation Space universe. It takes place on a planet you've never heard of before in any of the other books, but it involves a lot of the same things that are going on. Again, it's a little weird and it's a little hard to get into, but once you get into it, it's a really good book, and I highly recommend it. By the way, I'm doing these in kind of the order I think you ought to read them. I read them, of course, in publication order. So I read Chasm City like back early, and I didn't read this until recently. I think this order lets you get into the universe. Now, when we get to the rest of the books, you can read them in any order you want. You can read any of these books in any order you want. I'm just recommending. But Inhibitor Phase kind of ties up some things with the big bads of the Revelation Space books. You'll see. Now we get to my favorite trilogy, which is the Prefect Dreyfus Emergencies. These take place prior to these other Revelation Space novels, but in an area called the Glitter Band, which features prominently in a lot of the Revelation Space books, but this is before all this stuff happened. The Glitter Band was a set of man-made habitats built around this planet. I think the planet's called Yellowstone, and Chasm City is down on the planet Yellowstone, and then the Glitter Band are all the habitats orbiting up above. Tens of thousands of them. So millions of people. Well, they have to have police. This is basically the crime and punishment of the Revelation Space Universe. It's handled by people called prefects. And this book was called The Prefect in England when it came out in 2007, but apparently they didn't think Americans could understand what a prefect was, or would think it meant perfect. It's a fancy cop. It's a police procedural, but not like anything you've ever read before, and also taking place in a very fantastical world, centuries from now. They have post-humans, and there's AI. In fact, AI figures kind of prominently in a lot of these books. So if you're worried about AI and you want to see how bad it can get, read this. It doesn't all have to turn into the Terminator. This kind of stuff could happen. And you wouldn't like it if this stuff happened. So the first one was called The Prefect, in America, Aurora Rising. And then the second book in this series, which came out 2018, so like 11 years later, he got back to this with Elysium Fire, which takes a thing from that first book and says, well, what if this happened? And that happens. And that's this book. And then comes Machine Vendetta in 2023. So 5 years after this one. It's not a direct sequel to Elysium Fire, but it kind of is. And now we have warring artificial intelligences. And people are caught in the middle, and a fun time is had by almost no one. But it's a really good book, and you really come to care about the characters, and, well, that's what you want in a book. So those are the Revelation Space books. And these are the ones I recommend. These are why I made this video, because I think everyone should read these books. He's a really good writer. But that's not all he wrote. In 2012, he came out with a book called Blue Remembered Earth, which I do not have and have not read, because I just found out about it when I was doing the final research to make this video, and I didn't want to stop and go read 3 more books. But it's a series called Poseidon's Children, which asks the question, what if the continent of Africa banded together and became a spacefaring technological superstate, and then went out to seed the stars with humans? So we have Blue Remembered Earth, which came out in 2012, and then On the Steel Breeze in 2014, and then Poseidon's Wake in 2015. Again, I haven't read them, but I can recommend them because he's a really good writer, and so I imagine they're really good. I didn't know about them. Sorry. Then we get into his standalones. So in 2004, so kind of right after the first 3 Revelation Space books, he wrote a book called Century Reign, which starts out as a murder mystery in 1959 Paris. But as you're reading it, you're going, wait a minute, this isn't our Paris, because apparently the Nazis won World War II, and then it just spirals out from there. He's a science fiction writer. It's going to be science fiction. It just takes a while to get to it. But the murder mystery itself is entertaining and fun reading about. So I like this one a lot. Sadly, he said he's never going to write a sequel to this one. Hurts my heart. Then in 2005, he wrote Pushing Ice, which is a near-future space exploration thing where people are out. It's closer to now, but it's far enough ahead that we're going out and grabbing comets and to get their ice so we can get fresh water for the Earth. But then, one of these ships out there pushing ice makes first contact with an alien civilization, maybe. You're not really sure what's going on. They're not really sure what's going on. And it's just an amazing yarn that covers many, many years as the crew of this ship goes flying out into the cosmos attached to this alien vessel. Maybe? It's really, really good. I liked it a lot. The blurb is, it's a brilliant space opera of alien artifacts, glittering technologies, and deep mysteries. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Then we get to one of my favorite of his books, which is House of Suns. It came out in 2008. His own description of this on his website is starfaring clones 6 million years in the future. Well, that kind of gives you a hint, but there are King Crimson references in here. This reminds me a lot of Michael Moorcock's kind of stuff that he did back in the 70s. Really fascinating book. And there's machine intelligences that maybe want to kill humans or don't. And the humans maybe want to kill the artificial intelligence civilization, but maybe they don't. It's just amazing. Terminal World, which came out in 2010. Now, this is the author's description. Steampunky action on a dying world. I don't think is Earth, but maybe it's Earth. Maybe it's where we went to after we left Earth. But there's all these post-humans that have, altered themselves, including some that have turned themselves into essentially angels that have wings and they can only live up high. And, it's just fascinating. And then 2022, Eversion. This is a weird one. Of all Alastair Reynolds books, this is the one I like the least. It's a good story, and it has some interesting twists in it, but I just feel like it takes too long to get to the point. It's kind of like it was a great idea for a short story, and then let's expand it into a novel by adding more of these episodes that are weird, which aren't really necessary to be there. You could probably get there with 2 jumps to the end, and there's 5 or 6. I still read it all the way through. I couldn't put it down because he's a good writer. I just think this is like one of the weakest of his books. And then 3 more of his books that I don't have. I think I read them on iBooks or a Kindle or something. I don't have the hard copies. Or I do, and they're in the library. Oh, y'all have only seen the good part of the library. You haven't seen the floor. There's just thousands of books in there. Anyway, it's a young adult series called Revenger, the first book of which was called Revenger, which came out in 2016. And it's basically space pirates 10 million years in the future. Again, I think that's his words, but fairly accurate. They're these 2 sisters, and they fall into this thing, and they end up being space pirates, and that some of the technologies are really weird. And then the second book was called Shadow Captain, which came out in 2019. And then the final book was Bone Silence, which came out in 2020. And the bone thing is significant because the way they communicated over light speed type distances was using these bones of some alien you have to read the books. It's a fun romp. It's space pirates, written for young adults. Who's more young adult at heart than me? And maybe you. So those are the books of Alastair Reynolds. He also has short stories. In fact, when I was looking on Amazon to see when I bought some of these books back in 2010, I bought one that was 2 short stories set in the Revelation Space Universe. I think that may have been how I was introduced to it, as I read the short stories and then went back and read the novels. I recommend those 2. Basically, if you see anything that Alastair Reynolds wrote, buy it and read it, because he's a good author. It's good hard science fiction. Publishers Weekly called Absolution Gap a landmark in hard science fiction space opera. All of his books that you can get on Amazon will be linked down below with affiliate links so that maybe you can throw me a little commission so I can make a little money off of this deal, because this YouTube thing isn't working out so great for me financially. It's fun, but not lucrative. They'll all be linked down below. You can read them in any order you want. I read them again in publication order primarily, but I would kind of recommend the Revelation Space books first. They were really the first, 2000, 2002, 2003. Alastair Reynolds is one of my favorite hard science fiction writers. To prepare for this video, I reread all of these books here in front of me. I've been getting ready to make this video for over 6 months, but I wanted to reread them and get them back into my brain because, again, I read most of them over 15 years ago. But if you're looking for a last-minute Christmas present, let me recommend Alastair Reynolds. They're great books. They're really fun. I enjoyed the heck out of all of them. Well, Eversion I enjoyed the least. I still liked it. It was too long. All the rest of them are just fantastic. I highly recommend them all. So go out and buy some Alastair Reynolds. Give them as Christmas gifts. That's it for today. Thanks for stopping by. See you next time. Bye-bye. Now I got to go buy Poseidon's Children and read those books. Thanks for staying to the end. Bye-bye.